This is the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. As you guys know, if you've been listening, these are some of the shorter episodes that we're going to be recording in response to particular questions that we have been asked, whether that be through our social media, our Facebook group, and some questions do come into the email as well. So that's where we're getting these questions.
Yeah, they're just on that. There is effectively 3 ways you can get in contact to ask these questions. Well, there's technically 4, but anyway. So the first one is going to be, there is a form literally in the description. So you can click on that. You can type in your details, type in your question. That's probably the easiest way to get a question answered on the podcast. Okay. Then you can obviously join the free Facebook group. If you're not in there, I don't know what you're doing with your life, So join that. You can ask questions in there. We do answer them obviously in the group itself. That's a really great place to get a conversation going around a certain topic. But also we do sometimes get questions that are really good questions that we think would benefit the podcast itself. And obviously we then discuss it on the podcast. And then finally, if you do have a particular question that you want answered for yourself, or you want some very particular specific guidance, you can email us, and potentially it involves getting a service, like engaging with one of our services. Like maybe you do need a consultation, maybe you do need to get coaching, or want to join one of like the group coaching options. But again, you can email into the info inbox and we can answer your question there, or at least point you in the right direction. And again, if it is a good question, we might just use that for these Q&A episodes so we can help more people. But yeah, just thought I'd mention that because we did actually get a few questions in through different media, and people are kind of like, where do we actually submit these questions?
And this week's question is, what is the role, or are the roles of cheat meals and or refeeds as part of one's diet? I guess fat loss diet is assumed in this case. We can discuss both.
Yeah.
But yeah,
because this is the thing. And again, we've actually got a few questions of this over the last few weeks, months, because again, it is something that is propagated in the fitness industry. Well, I don't know. It's kind of, we'll say, fitness industry adjacent. People in the fitness industry promote it because they basically have eating disorders themselves, or disordered eating patterns themselves. So they use it like, cheat meals, they stoke the metabolic fire. So they essentially use that as some sort of, get out of jail free pass, So cheat meals as a concept, we've talked about it before. We've also talked about refeeds as well. So I'm literally not off the top of my head. I don't know the episode number that we talked about it on, but there is podcasts on that. We have talked about all of this kind of stuff as well on site in different articles across the board. But effectively the question is, should I be having cheat meals in my diet? Should I be having cheat days in my diet? And how do refeeds kind of play into that overall concept? Or are refeeds a separate concept themselves? And are they good or bad? So it's kind of a 3-pronged question, if you will. So again, we're going to assume, first of all, that it's a fat loss diet. So you're in some sort of calorie deficit across the week, so you're eating less, you're taking less energy in than you're expending, with the explicit goal of dropping body fat, losing body fat over time, So the concept goes, this is how people generally do a cheat meal or a cheat day. They diet for whatever, we'll say 6 days. They're dieting Monday to Friday. So they're in, usually it's a larger deficit. So they're in a 750 to 1,000 calorie deficit, bigger than what we'd recommend, which is, we'll say a 250 to 500 calorie deficit. Like we like a longer time frame for dieting, but they're in this larger deficit again, which has its place. It has a place in your overall strategy depending on the situation. But generally it is a larger deficit that people engage in. And then they effectively, on a Saturday or a Sunday, they have a cheat meal or a cheat day where they effectively eat all the foods that they've been restricting themselves from. They eat ad libitum, and they literally are allowed to eat as many calories as they like, right? Sometimes people will do like a feeding window. They'll be like, oh, well, I can have my dinner. That's it. The last meal of the day. That's all I can have. Some people will do like, yeah, I'll have my normal breakfast. Maybe I'll train on the Saturday or whatever. But then between after training and Saturday night, I'm allowed to eat whatever the fuck I want. And so obviously there's different strategies, different ways people go about this, but effectively it comes down to, oh, I'm allowed to eat whatever I've been craving through the week. I'm allowed to eat, burgers, pizzas, whatever, the stuff that's not on my plan, not on my diet plan. And they're allowed to do that and still make progress, right? So it's actually really weird because this is a concept that kind of, I don't know, belittles a lot of people's supposed beliefs, right? And what I mean by that is you'll see hardcore like bodybuilder types like this, or people that are like very much into, oh no, you have to eat certain foods. You can only eat chicken, rice, broccoli. These are health foods. You wouldn't do that IIFYM stuff where you eat whatever you want and you fit it into your calories and macros. No, that's not a healthy diet, right? Because these foods are bad foods, right? They're like, those are bad foods. But then they go right around and Saturday night, they're like, oh yeah, I can have a pizza, I can have a burger, I can do whatever the fuck, I can have all these bad foods, but it's only once a week, so it's fine. But it's like, you've effectively, potentially, the exact same amount of calories you spent on that meal, the person doing IIFYM is spending them across the week, So it's like, there's some sort of like a dichotomous thought process here where you're not actually fully thinking these concepts through, right? But that's just a kind of an aside. So the concept of doing that, if you just look at it from a thermodynamic perspective, right? And what I mean by that is just purely from an energy perspective. What a lot of people do is they'll eat at a severe deficit, a big deficit, Monday to Friday, and then effectively, we'll say there's 2 days, because this is quite usual as well for people that are not, actually doing cheat meals or cheat days, but they're effectively treating their weekend like cheat weekends, where they're on plan Monday to Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, they're off plan, right? And again, you can look at it, we'll say you're supposed to, you need whatever, 3,500 calorie deficit across a week to lose roughly a pound of body fat. That's the general figures that are given. And that's what you're trying to do. Now, you can set up your diet so that you offset whatever calorie increases you have on the weekend. You can offset them by eating way less Monday to Friday, right? So we'll say on Monday to Friday, you're in 1,000 calorie deficit every single day, right? So you're eating 1,000 calories less than you need to maintain your body weight, right? And then on the weekends, you just don't eat enough. So we'll say you're in a 5,000 total calorie deficit across the week. You could still eat up to whatever. You could eat whatever. We'll say you eat 1,500 calories extra across those 2 days from your maintenance calories. Your maintenance, we'll say, are 3,000, and you've been eating 2,000 calories Monday to Friday. You've been starving yourself Monday to Friday. You're really hungry on that, but on Saturday and Sunday, you can then eat at your normal 3,000 and again have whatever 1,500 extra, but you'll still be in a deficit across the week. Those numbers may not add up perfectly. I'm just doing them off the top of my head, but you get the kind of concept where, you're still below your total calories per week to ensure that fat loss is continuing, right? And people will use that then go, oh yeah, like this disordered eating pattern that I'm giving myself is really effective because I effectively starve myself Monday to Friday. Saturday and Sunday, I eat all the foods that I could possibly want, but as long as I'm not eating too much or too many calories, I'm still losing weight, so it's all good, but you can already start seeing that is, as I just mentioned there, it is a disordered eating pattern where you're effectively, restricting and then binging, and that is like a binge restrict disordered eating pattern, So what are your thoughts on that there, Gary? Just so I can have a little sip of my coffee.
Yeah, and like this is something that we did touch on quite a bit in an article or in one of the longer episodes a while back on the concept of like flexibility in dieting, and like there's pros and cons. I think like as we discussed in that episode, I think there's a positive aspect to recognizing that it's your weekly calories that matter, and I'll certainly implement that with some of my clients where I'll encourage them to if they like, particularly with like some of the smaller females, like, and smaller males, but like if you're 50 to 60 kilos, let's say you're 50 kilos, some women might even be lighter than that. If you're 50 kilos, like by default you're going to have very low maintenance calories, so as a result, if you want to plan to go out and have a meal at a particular restaurant, like if your maintenance calories are like 1200 to 1400, which most of the fitness industry just like to pretend doesn't exist, that there aren't people like that, but there are. Like if your maintenance calories are 1200 to 1400, like the practicality of being able to go out and have a meal like probably 1000 to 1500 calories realistically, if you're if you're having two or more courses, the practicality of that is just really challenging. It's really challenging for that individual. So in that case, it can be effective for someone to implement some sort of intervention where they're like, all right, I'm going to take away 100 or 200 calories from a couple of days during the week. Like generally I wouldn't encourage more than 2 days. Like I don't want someone restricting throughout the week generally, just to allow that bit of a buffer to allow them to go out, and you could call it quote unquote damage control, so to speak. So they're the types of strategies that can be effective where like you're planning, it's very clear why you're planning, and it's not coming from a place of like you're suggesting disordered eating. Like where that becomes a little bit more of a problem is in those individuals who it almost spirals out of control and gets a bit worse every week. They kind of, week one it's like, oh yeah, I took some calories away from Friday so I could have a larger meal Saturday, and then week two it's like I did Thursday and Friday and then I had more Saturday and Sunday, and before you know it, their week looks like 60% of maintenance Monday to Friday, and then whatever 120 to 150% of maintenance across 2 days then over the weekend. Like when things get like that, I start to get a bit concerned. I start to get a bit concerned that someone is maybe like losing control, so to speak, on those Saturday and Sunday the days. Because one of the things that you'll see, like when people try to define like disordered eating or binge eating, is like it's obviously quite challenging because it's like, all right, where do we put the calorie cutoff? Like, and they'll say it kind of ends up being quite big, where it's a very large meal at a single point in time, which could be 1500 calories for one person, 2000 for someone else. So it can be a bit big. But one of the key defining factors is that sense that you've sort of lost control, where you're eating and you're eating with a sense of a loss of control. Like this isn't what you actually want to be doing, but you've gone beyond that point. So if someone was telling me that, oh, I planned to have a bit extra Saturday and Sunday, but I totally lost control, ended up going way over, I just couldn't stop myself, I definitely wouldn't want to push that cycle forward by then further restricting midweek. I think that's where things get.
Yeah, and just on that, so it's actually a really easy thing to fall into, and you can see the effects of it like months, weeks, months, years down the line. Where it is very easy to fall into it because, again, like you said, you have a really bad weekend, and you're like, oh fuck, I ate way too many calories at the weekend, so I'm going to just restrict a little bit more Monday to Friday. So I was eating at, well, say 500. You're doing things quote unquote right. I'm only eating like a 250, 500 calorie deficit Monday to Friday. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to eat at maintenance so I can have a few extra little treats on the weekend. Again, pretty valid approach. You'd be like, that's good. Then again, those little treats on the weekend, those cheat meals on the weekend are a little bit bigger than you thought. So you're like, oh, actually, Monday to Friday, I'm going to just increase the deficit a little bit, 600 calorie deficit, right? Monday to Friday, we're all good. And then the next weekend, you're just that little bit hungrier, and you're like, actually, yeah, kind of lost a little bit of control again, and had a little bit more. So, I kind of have to do a little bit of damage control, like post damage control, and then I still want to have this approach the next weekend, it suits me, suits my lifestyle. And so they're in a 700 calorie deficit now, Monday to Friday. But then the next weekend comes around and it's an even bigger blowout. And then again, the next week let's reduce calories further. And then it's another big blowout. And you get into this real cycle where you essentially lose control of yourself completely at the weekends. You don't have any ability to, effectively control yourself around food. It's like you don't even want the food and you eat it anyway. And you see this down the lines, like people that have got into these kind of disordered eating patterns, they still permeate their thought process, or they still have disordered patterns around food, in terms of that you'll see them constantly. And this is actually something that's really pervasive in the fit fam, where they'll effectively be like, oh yeah, I'm going to try to just tighten up a little bit. And then someone will bring out food, and they'll be like, oh no, I just lost control. I ate a load of food, but I'm going to just keep dieting, keep trying to diet. And then, oh yeah, but then I had to have this meal with my friend over here, and they again have this big blowout meal. And effectively it looks like them just constantly having these blowout meals where they just have no control. And then they're like, oh yeah, it's fine. I'm going to bring myself into a deficit. And they just always hover around this, like, I'm in a deficit, but I have no control around food. So I'm never actually in a deficit, but they're really restricted in their meals, and they feel guilty. They're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to restrict back a little bit for the next few meals or the next day or whatever. And they effectively, you see it over time, where they effectively just slowly but surely add weight, like more weight to their bodies over time. And they're like, they always constantly feel like they're in a deficit. They're like, oh, I'm so restricted in my food choices. I have to, only eat like veg and chicken, and that's it, But then they have these huge blowouts, and they're just constantly in this cycle. And you see this a lot in the fitness industry. It's also unfortunately very common in like the real world, where people effectively feel like they are dieting all the time, but they're because of all these cheat meals or these blowout meals, they're never actually in a diet. So even though they're feeling restricted for 2 days of the week or 2 meals of the day or whatever, the fact that they have these huge calorie boluses every so often dotted throughout the week means that they're probably even in a surplus when you look at the week total, And that's the issue for a lot of people. And this is the main issue with cheat meals in general, right? So if you're doing a cheat meal just as a concept and you are not controlling for calories, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage. And what I mean by that is, say you have your diet set up, you're like, my calorie level is 2,500, and I'm going to just stick to that Monday to Friday or Monday to Sunday. That's my calorie level, right? And then you have, I'm actually just, I'm going to allow myself one meal where I'm not sticking to this rigid plan or this rigid calorie load or whatever. And I'm just going to eat whatever I want, but it's only one meal, so it can't really do too much damage, And that can work for a while, because again, it might leave you, again, say your maintenance is 3,000 and you're eating 2,500. So you're always, every single day, at a 500 calorie deficit, except for that day you have the cheat meal. And, maybe the first few meals of them are just like, oh yeah, I made a homemade pizza. It was a little bit off plan. It didn't really fit in my overall calories or macros, but, I was actually just craving a little bit of a pizza, right? And again, then the next week you're like, oh, well, actually I'm going to go out for, burgers or whatever. And again, it's like, oh, well, actually I had the chips with them, and, I had a beer with it as well. Like, still not too bad. We'll say you just got up to that 3,000 calorie level. You're just at maintenance for that day. Ooh, big deal, no big issue, right? But then the meals start getting more and more elaborate. They're like, oh, well, I actually went to the Cheesecake Factory, and, I actually got, a 3-course meal, and all of them were 1,000 calories each. It's like they just get more and more elaborate. And it's like, oh, well, the cheap meal, basically I ruined the evening. So I had the meal, and then I came home, and, there was that tub of Ben and Jerry's in the freezer. So, I had that as well. It's like they just get more and more elaborate, bigger and bigger calorie loads. And it's like, okay, you're effectively ruining all the work you've done all week, or the deficit you've been in all week, just so you can have this calorie bolus. And again, that might be the approach that is effective for you if you want to stay at maintenance and over the week, and that these meals, like, you have something on it. You're a fucking DJ on the weekend, and every Saturday you're going to have to eat more calories or you're going to have to consume more. And you're like, this is the approach that allows me to maintain my body weight, or maybe be in a slight deficit where I know that meal is going to be uncontrolled, or that day is going to be uncontrolled calorie wise. I'm going to try keep some sort of control of it. But basically the rest of the week, I'm staying in a deficit. But that would then imply that you are some way managing calories on that blowout day, that cheat meal or whatever. And again, that's what we would recommend if you are going to do it. The very least, you have to control for calories, so you know where you're at. Don't have calories don't count mindset when you're doing this, right? But if you're not tracking calories, the ability for you to go so far over your calorie targets is astronomical. Like, again, Gary, you've probably seen this with clients. You probably experienced this yourself, especially when you were younger or whatever. You do really a lot of hard work. You stick to your fucking diet program Monday to Friday, Saturday, whatever. And then you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go out with the family, or I'm going to go out with whatever, whoever. And then you just have this huge blowout meal. And effectively you just wake up on Monday and you're in the exact same spot you were last Monday. And it's like, I've just effectively in one meal, set myself back an entire week, So it just feels like you're kind of just burning your tires. You're just fucking running them out, and you're not doing anything to actually get where you want to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like I think people totally underestimate how easy it is to actually just get your calories up like ridiculously high. Because like recently what I've been doing is like I've been training a lot. So I've been doing a lot of training, particularly a lot of like aerobic training, like which is going to be generally a lot more energy intensive than the typical weight training. And it's been a surprise to me how much my maintenance has actually shot up. So like yesterday we had jiu-jitsu training yesterday morning, and we just went in, and he was like our coach Wilson was like, oh yeah, we're going to do 2 hours of rolls today. I was like, all right, like, good crack. So like, but that's a hard session. And then yesterday evening, I did some running, and I was quite active throughout the day anyway. So energy expenditure is way up. And then throughout the day, I was kind of just eating relatively normally, as in like, yeah, it was my granddad's birthday. So we had a meal, we had dessert, we had all that sort of stuff. I had a breakfast that was probably the same size as my normal breakfast. And then I went to the cinema last night with my parents. I know, pretty cool guy, huh? Went to the cinema with my parents and got, shared a popcorn with my mom and got some sweets. And like, I look back at the end of the day, because the odd time these days, I kind of just pin my calories or my food into chronometer just to kind of see where things are at, but I'm not really tracking. And it was like 4,700 calories. And I'm like, shit, like that's a lot of calories to just kind of casually accumulate. And like, for me, that's fine, because that's more or less like will equate to maintenance across the week for me, which is pretty much what I'm looking for. But the point being that you can very easily end up at very high levels of calories without even trying. And that was, in that case, like that was probably me making a couple of quote unquote smart decisions, knowing that it would be very easy to eat even more. I didn't get my own popcorn. I didn't get a proper Coke. So if you're doing all these things that regular people do, like go to the cinema, having a meal for your grandparents' birthday, having a nice breakfast at home because you're home for the weekend or whatever, very easy for these things to accumulate like really, really high. And it's not uncommon for me to see that with a client where they'll basically say, oh yeah, like Saturday was just a bit of a blowout. I had this on, and they won't track it in their tracking document. And then what I say to them is, I'm like, no, like for your own benefit, what I want you to do is go back through the day and actually track that and put it into the document. And like, it's not uncommon to see people who are like under 70 kilos, like in the 60s, just accumulate like 6,000 plus calories.
Easily.
Like that's easy work. Like, and I mean, if you consider like how that then fits in, if that person was trying to be in a deficit, like there's no chance that is happening that week. So
just on that, before you go on, like we're not even just talking about like that's very easy to do if you are like eating pizzas, burgers, or whatever. Like this, like human food. Like you could literally have, I don't know, go out to get breakfast. We'll say you go out like, oh, I'm having a whatever brunch with the family or whatever, and you get eggs on toast with avocado and butter or whatever. Like that meal in literally like, we'll say 2 or 3 slices of toast with all that stuff on it, easily could be 2K calories, you know? And it's like, this is just normal food, but because there's such high fat content, because, you know, maybe there's sugar, you got a latte or whatever, there's 300 calories in that, you know, it all just adds up so quickly. Like you might feel, you know, a little bit stuffed from that, but especially if you've been in a deficit and you've been in a somewhat of a big deficit, you're probably quite hungry, you know? So going into that, you're already like a little bit hungrier, you know? So you have a little bit of, we'll say, a little bit of room to play around with fullness. Like you probably still don't feel 100% full after that huge meal anyway, you know?
Yeah, like it is shocking. Like most of the time, if I was to go out for like a a three course meal, say with my family, and you track it afterwards, like you're easily looking at 2 to 2,500 calories, like if not more. You know, if you're picking in a bit of bread and you're also having a couple of drinks, like you're easily pushing those numbers. You know, and when you see people eating out, it's not like one of the things about eating out that's interesting is that people tend to get more or less the same stuff. As in, if you're a 60 kilo female, or there's, you know, the 100 kilo male who trains loads, their meals, like their meals are probably going to be fairly similar, you know. And it's just unfortunate that it's much harder for smaller individuals to be able to then live a healthful lifestyle if they're also having, you know, 3 course meals like very regularly. Let's say, like I always feel bad for people who work in like HR and stuff in companies, because you're often dining with you know, people from other companies all the time, and you could have to do that multiple times per week. So that's
Just
when
being in an office, everyone seems to just bring in like
you know,
sweet
every day.
chocolates in, biscuits in. Who does this? But apparently everyone in offices does that.
But anyway, yeah. So I think that kind of covers the actual the cheat meal side of things, especially like in an unintentional sense. The place where we need to kind of round this out now, I think, is the people who are using these types of strategies, such as cheat meals or refeeds, which like most of the time they look the same. Like, but cheat meals or refeeds where one is actually trying to attain some sort of purported benefit. So they're doing this because they think that, like, not that it's benign or it's not going to cause harm, but that there's an actual benefit here. And that those benefits, you know, are often related to things like it's going to increase my metabolism. Okay, so I'm going to have a faster metabolism, or it's it's going to replenish my muscle glycogen, my fuel stores, and allow me to train more productively throughout the week. Or it might be just that someone is saying, look, when I do this, I feel like I get a bit of a psychological boost that gives me motivation going into the week. I don't feel as lethargic. I don't feel as like drained from the dieting process, etc. Now, the main difference between those two approaches, where one is just having like a cheat meal or cheat day or a refeed, is typically just the macronutrient composition, as in most people will refer to a refeed type of day or meal as one that has very high carbohydrates and lower fat, because the intent is to get the benefit from those carbohydrates in terms of that being the primary fuel source for anyone who's exercising above low intensities, the replenishment of those fuel stores, and then some hormonal things that go into the pretty much everything, like appetite regulation, the reproductive system, everything. So carbohydrates are going to be stimulatory of some of those things that we might be concerned with. So what are your thoughts on these strategies, Paddy? What are we seeing in terms of like is there research to support that, like, oh, you're going to have like this massive boost in metabolic rate, or what's the
Yeah, well, there's a few things. First of all, so I'm just going to just summarize the cheat meal thing for a second, so we can kind of just box that off fully. So with the cheat meals, if you're going to engage in some sort of cheat meal style behavior, cheat day style behavior, at the very least, you need to track calories so that you can actually see where you are in a thermodynamic sense. So you can see that, oh, actually, I had 6,000 calories on that day. That's why I actually am up 2 pounds, and I'm going to have to diet now further for another 4 weeks or whatever, you know? So at the very least, you can see that, you know? And ideally, you would do some sort of, if you're doing that cheat meal type approach and you're like, oh, I want to eat something that's, you know, not on plan or not my normal type of food, at least keep it within some sort of calorie level. Again, we'll say your maintenance is 3,000. you adjust your day some like earlier in the day or whatever, so that you can allot that 900 calories for that burger and chips that you wanted, and yeah, okay, one day of the week you're eating at maintenance, and then the rest of the days you're in a deficit, but you've somewhat controlled calories. So if you are going to engage in those behaviors, those cheat meal behaviors, cheat day behaviors, the very least you need to be aware of and control for calories in some regard. Ideally, if you feel that there are foods that you want to eat, the best approach is probably to find a way to work them into your diet continuously throughout the week, and not have some sort of disordered pattern where you're like, oh, these are bad foods, these are good foods, like not have that dichotomous approach in your head, But for some people, having a little bit of something that they want throughout the week is just not a good approach for them. They're like, oh, well, I can't have one biscuit, I need to have the whole packet of biscuits, So for those people, you're either going to have some sort of an approach where you control for the calories while you have that whole packet of biscuits, or biscuits are a bad food for you, and that's an unfortunate approach that you have to undergo. But again, it depends on what you're actually trying to achieve and the time frame and everything that you have to actually achieve. Okay, so I think that kind of boxes that off. Control for calories at the very least. Ideally, don't have disordered cheat. You don't cheat on your diet. You cheat on a test. Your diet should just be the food that you eat. But anyway, so that's that. Then you also see people that are like, especially in the fitness realm, that are like, oh no, I actually get a performance benefit, a hormonal benefit, a metabolic benefit, or whatever from engaging in these. And like you said, Gary, the science would support some of this stuff, right? But it would support it from the perspective of, we'll say, carbohydrates, right? But first of all, what you'll generally see people do is not prioritize high carbohydrate meals, even though they say they're trying to get a refeed benefit. And what I mean by this is people are like, oh yeah, I'm doing a refeed, and they'll have like a burger and chips. They'll go to like Bunsen, we'll say, and they have this fatty burger that's like 30% fat beef patty, and it's like, yeah, fuck, this is a refeed. And it's like, that meal probably only had about like 100 grams of carbs. Like, yeah, that's a decent whack of carbs. Like, yeah, that's nice. But that meal probably had about fucking 150 grams of fat, So you're not prioritizing a meal that would get you the benefits that you're saying you're trying to get, refill glycogen stores, some interaction with hormones. Like obviously fat is important for hormones, but it's kind of overblown in terms of the importance of it, because it's mainly cholesterol that is important for hormones, which again, that's a different story. We'll talk about that another day. But it's mainly that, and then the interactions with like leptin and any of those kind of neuroregulatory hormones. Again, it's carbohydrates that are having a bigger impact on them as well. So you basically prioritize the meal that is not going to get you the benefits that you're saying you're using that meal for, right? Now, if someone was like, oh yeah, I'm having a refeed meal, and they were literally, even sushi, I'd even go with sushi, like we'll say lots of carbs, lots of salt as well, and some protein, relatively lower in fat. I'd be like, okay, I can get on board with this being a refeed meal for the purported benefits you're trying to get. I could potentially get on board with that. But more likely, if you're going to, I'm having a refeed meal, you're going to prioritize a meal that is very high in carbohydrates. Calories, again, should be somewhat controlled, where you're like, okay, well, I want to go up to, like, we'll say 150% of maintenance, or up to maintenance at least, whatever your approach is with that, you are still controlling for calories. It's not just, oh, I'm having whatever the fuck I want, and then going, oh yeah, it's a refeed. Yeah, man, I just needed it. I was feeling flat. Like you'll see bodybuilders and all that, oh, I was feeling flat. And they, again, prioritize this super high fat, like meal pizza, with like all the chorizo, fucking pepperoni and fucking whatever, like high fat foods on the pizza. It's like, this isn't, if you're feeling flat, this is the exact meal that's going to do nothing for your feeling flatness, or rather it's going to do the least for it. You want to prioritize carbohydrates, and yeah, obviously there is carbohydrates in that, but it's like, this is not, you just wanted a pizza, stop saying that you were feeling flat, so there's that, first of all. So if you are trying to get some refeed benefits, then your cheat meal or your refeed meal should actually reflect those goals. So it's going to be higher in carbohydrates, relatively lower in fat, and relatively lower in protein. Again, assuming your protein goal for the day is still met. So that's the first thing, right? Your meal should actually reflect the goal. But then we have to actually address is that actually doing anything for what you're trying to do? The restocking glycogen, yeah, that's pretty valid approach. However, even just thinking about that, I would, and again, this depends on where you fall on your dieting practices, like what kind of dieting styles you like. But we'll say everyone's controlling for calories. Everyone's aware of that. If you're not doing that, then again, I can't really have an intellectual nutritional conversation, because that's the fundamentals. This is just, if you're not doing that, then you don't have a nutritional practice. So that's the first thing. So we're saying we're all agreeing on that, but maybe you like to have high days, low days, medium days with your carbs. You like to vary it. Maybe you like a lower carb approach, maybe a ketogenic approach, whatever it is, right? So there's obviously different approaches. My approach, and generally our approach, is I would like to see you preferentially have a higher carbohydrate. Like, I'd like to diet you on as high carbohydrates as we possibly can throughout the week, throughout the months, throughout your entire dieting phase. So I'd rather not see carbs get so low that you're feeling depleted, or that you are in a position where you feel you need to restock your glycogen. Like, I would rather not see that. Now, that's obviously not always possible, especially if you are some sort of physique competitor where you're very, very lean and you're kind of just on that edge where calories are just sufficient to support training, just sufficient to support daily activity, and you're really pushing fat loss. So once you get down to the extremes like this, maybe these kind of approaches where you do bring in higher days of carbohydrates have some validity. But if you are, we'll say, over 8%, over 10% body fat as a male, or over 15, 16% body fat as a female, it's like, okay, well, this you still have body fat on your frame, like that can still be used. It's not as much of an issue, So bringing in higher carb approaches for those individuals, I don't really see I'd rather just see you diet overall on higher carbohydrates, so that 1 day approach of bringing in high carbs to replete your depleted glycogen or whatever, like, yes, there is obviously validity to it, but if you're going to have to do that every single week, I'd rather just see you diet on higher carbs throughout the week. Would you agree with that, Gary?
Yeah, like, I think that's pretty reasonable. I mean, like, the thing with these types of considerations is that we always have to remember the training process is ongoing. So if someone is, training, as you alluded to, you want to be able to fuel that. You want to be able to maximize muscle retention or fuel the process of building muscle, if that's, a valid outcome here. Or you want to just fuel training performance. Some of you might be listening to this and you might play a sport, or you might engage in a couple of different activities, and fueling those is quite important. And that's something we have alluded to in the past, where, while it is average calories that really matter when it comes to body composition, the process of fueling training also has to be considered within that. And it's very reductionistic to just think, oh, once you hit your calories across the week, that's all that matters. Because very clearly, if you were to fast from Monday to Friday and then meet your calories on Saturday or Sunday, that's clearly not the exact same thing. Like, anyone like with half a brain would realize that Friday's training session, when you've been fasting and that's your 5th day, probably isn't going to be as productive as if you were to have consumed plenty of calories already. So that's a consideration that goes across the board for refeeds, or someone who's calling their meals cheat meals, or they're saving all their calories for the weekend. You do have to consider how that fits together, and also how that fits into the dieting experience. Like, as you alluded to, it's generally nicer to just have your carbohydrates or your extra calories across the week, as opposed to just putting them to the weekend. Like, if it happens to fit your social schedule and meets those needs, then yeah, having more at the weekend might be fine. But overall, if you can just have more calories throughout the week, and you never get to that point where you feel quite as restricted, then that's generally going to remove the need for you to have those sort of, those refeeds or those days where you need to refuel, because you won't have depleted as much in the first place. So yeah, I'd be very much in agreement with that. There can definitely be places where refeeds can be a bit more useful, and generally kind of multi-day ones are probably a bit better, and generally in people who are dieting for much longer periods of time, especially those who are getting to very low levels of body fat. But as you alluded to, most people aren't getting there. Like, most people are when they talk about fat loss, they're talking about maybe getting to 12% or so, which most people like higher for females, but let's say 12% for males, where you kind of got that position that you're in that place where, like, yeah, you're seeing your abs, but like, you're not covered in veins, you don't have lines in your glutes. Like, if you're not at that position, you needn't really stress like too much about needing to fuel your physiology, and you're never getting to that point where you have like as significant low energy availability, unless it's the case that you're just in a huge deficit overall. In which case, maybe reduce the extent of that deficit and you might feel a bit better. So yeah, it's a pretty simple and boring recommendation, because I know people like to hear that, oh, you can do this kind of dieting trick where you just massively increase your calories and it's going to fix everything. But in this case, it's like, just adjust your approach overall, and you'll probably feel a bit better, like, to play devil's advocate as well, I think sometimes we can be guilty, like people who are interested in, the quote unquote science, we become guilty of like swinging too far to the other side and saying, no, refeeds do not increase your metabolism. Whereas like you have to, I think it's easier to spell it out for people that yes, like having a refeed or just eating more food in general does increase your metabolism. It does increase your metabolic rate. And that's the case across the board. Like, if you go on a diet plan and you just start eating more, yeah, your metabolism increases, but it doesn't generally increase sufficiently to offset the additional calories that you've eaten. So that's why you see changes in maintenance calories up or down, depending on how many calories someone is eating. But that doesn't mean that there's an inherent benefit, because you're not moving closer towards your goal.
Yeah, this is something that people I find really hard to grasp as a concept, because they've effectively been lied to by the media or whatever. But yeah, like, if you look at obese people, they literally have the fastest metabolisms. They have a faster metabolism. Like, they're eating more, so they've got a bigger thermic effect of feeding, right? So if they're eating 4,000 calories per day or extra than what you're eating, so you're eating 2,000, they're eating 6,000, that is still a thermic effect of feeding. But also, every single activity they do when they weigh 300, 400 pounds, they are burning more calories for that unit of activity. Like, they take one step, like they basically have to do a 400 calorie or 400 pound lunge, like semi lunge, to take that step. Whereas you, as a whatever 200 pound male, like, you were literally doing half the work to do that. Now, that's obviously not perfect equation, but you get the concept. Like, their metabolism is greater. They're eating more and they weigh more. And they're basically the two biggest determinants of your metabolism. Like, obviously, age, gender, all that stuff goes into it. But the idea that having a faster metabolism is a good thing is somewhat wrong,
Yes, sir.
But anyway, go on.
I was saying, all that matters at the end of the day is your ability to be above or below or at wherever your metabolic rate is. And if you can do that, you're going to move in any of those respective directions or stay the same. So like, it's boring, but it just is.
Yeah. And then the next thing then, just to kind of round this up, is, okay, so yeah, you can top up your glycogen stores by having that. We would argue that having a more steady approach throughout the weeks, months is a better approach, but maybe you just like doing that. Again, fits your social life, fits your schedule. Cool. I'm not going to argue with you having one day a week that is calorie controlled, and it brings your carbohydrates back up to maintenance, maybe a little bit above maintenance, and you're using that as a refeed day so that you can then go train hard for the rest of the week. Cool. I have no problems with that overall. That could definitely be a valid approach depending on the situation, right? However, the next thing then people will say is, oh, it actually has real benefits in terms of, say, leptin, right? Resetting like your neuro regulation of appetite and all of these kind of things, or all these negative adaptations that occur due to dieting. You know, one day of higher calories can effectively offset all these things, right? And that just doesn't seem to bear out in the research, right? Like at the least, I would say probably 3 days of maintenance or above maintenance is going to be required to meaningfully affect any of those things that people are saying is effective, right? And this is generally something that you see quite a bit. Like you'll have people that are dieting, like I'm sure you've seen this with your clients, where you know you've been dieting for a while, we'll say 16 weeks, and they've gotten relatively lean, right? And then you're like, okay, you haven't done any diet breaks, any refeeds or anything like that throughout that 16 weeks. And you've been tracking your meat, you've been tracking steps, been doing whatever. And then you're like, okay, cool, we've actually achieved what we set out to achieve. Let's go back to maintenance, right? And you bring them back to maintenance calories, or roughly where you think maintenance calories are. And then it'll take about 2 or 3 days for those individuals to really start ramping up their metabolism, wherein that they start feeling more energetic. They're like, okay, actually, no, I'm not as hungry. I'm not as food focused. I feel a little bit warmer, like I'm running a little bit hotter. And then also, you know, my NEAT has spontaneously increased. Like I was tracking my 10,000 steps, but I just seem to be getting 12,000 now. I just seem to be doing a little bit more. And you've probably seen this in your clients yourself, where like this just happens, but it only happens after like 2, 3, 5 days. You know, obviously it's going to be different for different individuals. Some people are going to notice it after a day. Like that's fair. But the majority of people, I'm going to say about 3 days is what they're going to need to notice a meaningful effect. And ideally, like I would like to see people at least spend a week refeeding, you know, at or above maintenance to actually get effects from this approach, you know? So I'm actually just not a fan of refeed days or refeed weekends. You know, maybe a long weekend, you know, you're like, oh, we've 3 days for this weekend. I'm going to go to calorie maintenance and I'm going to refeed. I'm like, cool, that may get you some effects, but I'd rather just see people take a week to 2 week diet break, you know, and effectively just eat at maintenance. And then they get a much better response from resetting all of these metabolic cues or whatever, you know? So would you agree with that?
I would agree. Like I just don't implement these things with my clients in general. As in, like most of my clients are people like quote unquote in the real world. You know, like they're generally like there's going to be weekends anyway where they go out with friends and family and eat more. Like it's not like we have to prospectively plan like, oh, you need to eat more to offset this. Like it's just not a thing in the real world. Like there obviously we have some physique oriented clients, and in those cases there definitely are times where I do, you know, implement, all right, you know what, let's actually bump up carbohydrates for a couple of days, or for a week we'll do like a diet break. But generally, like if I'm looking to have a significant effect on some of the things you're talking about, it's going to be like a week long. But for the average general population, unless someone is competing, these are very rarely on my mind. Like it's just not something I would really consider, or for myself.
You're dead right. So to wrap this one up, basically cheat meals, unnecessary. There's literally no benefit to them. Maybe some psychological stuff, but again, I would be of the opinion that I would like to see that spread out throughout the week and actually work. Like people also do this all the time where it's like, oh, I have psychological benefits from this. And like, okay, well, this is a disordered eating pattern that you're exhibiting. Just like, let's not feed into this. Let's actually address why you get psychological benefits from basically having disordered eating, you know? Like, let's actually address that. Rather than just like, you know, ignore it and go, yeah, let's actually just respect your disordered eating and, you know, feed into it. But anyway, that's an aside. So yeah, cheat meals, probably wouldn't instigate them, probably wouldn't bring them in. If you do feel that you need to at least control for calories across the week, across the month, across the whatever, you know. Refeeding then, again, it's a valid approach, but for performance, like restocking glycogen, I'd be more in favor of just dieting on higher calories, dieting on higher carbohydrates more often throughout the entire diet. And then if you are trying to get some actual benefits like metabolic benefits, neuroregulation benefits, like I'm seeing like 3 days to 14 days to actually see that. It's not going to happen in one meal. Excuse me. It's not going to happen in one day for most people anyway. So yeah, I'm not bringing in refeeds for most people. Like you said, Gary, like there's going to be times with most of our clients who are at Gen Pop where, you know, they're going to be a weekend, there's a wedding, there's a family outing, there's a whatever. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're just going to take the foot off the gas pedal here and, you know, let's see how calories play out on that day. Oh, you had a little bit more, no big deal. That's just going to fuel the training process throughout the next few weeks or whatever. And as long as we are still trending in the right direction for what we want, then we're on track, you know?
Yes, sir. Like, I mean, if you want slower results and you don't want to lose fat as quick, like have refeeds and cheat meals all the time. It's a great idea.
Makes sense. Right, I'm going to wrap this one up. As always, guys, you can subscribe to the newsletter. That's where you will get, every week, you will get Gary talking to you in your inbox, sending you all the articles that were written that week, sending you all the social media posts we did, all the vlogs we've done, all the podcasts, everything. He also goes into some, you know, book recommendations, resource recommendations, all of that kind of jazz. So if you're not subscribed to that, I would recommend subscribing to that. It's only one email per week. You know, I don't like reading multiple emails per week from companies, so we just keep it at one. The only time we'll send more than one is if there is something that we're like, oh, this is time sensitive and we think that our listeners, our readers or whatever would benefit from it. So you might get an email very occasionally midweek for something, you know? And other than that, you can follow us on social media, like, comment, subscribe, do all of that fun stuff, especially on the YouTube channel, because we are back trying to build up that YouTube channel. So it does really help if you like, comment, and subscribe and do all that stuff. I'm not going to ask you to fucking hit that notification bell. Like, I don't do that when I look at YouTube, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. But it does really help if you do subscribe and if you do like the actual videos. And obviously subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on, if you are listening on that. We do also still have coaching spaces available. We have group coaching spaces available because that's effectively an unlimited service, and that's kind of slowly but surely taking off. So if you are looking to get into a cheaper level or a cheaper price point for coaching, that would definitely be a good service to engage in. And again, you can ask questions in the group with that. You can also then, if you're like, I don't know if that's actually for me, like, you can send me an email and I will respond. I will answer your questions. If you're like, oh, what's the training structure like? How's the diet run? Whatever. I can answer your questions. You can work out if it is a service that you would like to engage in, you know? So there's male and female groups for that. So get involved if you are interested. What else do we have, Gary? Oh, we have ebooks as well. Yeah, they're doing pretty well. Like, I've been talking to a few people that have bought them and they're like, oh yeah, I'm actually really enjoying these. I'm really enjoying how there's a structure. I like there's periodization. You know, people are like, oh, well, I like to train 4 days. They already have a kind of structure in place themselves. But, you know, some people want to just check that their training methodologies are on point. Some people just want to have a program where they're like, I don't want to have to think about this stuff. I'm an accountant. I don't care about this health and fitness stuff. I just want to get in shape. I just want to be, you know, where I want to be with the physique. I just want a program to follow. So ideal for that. We have 3, 4, 5, and soon to be 6 day. I don't know, Gary, this is going to be out on Thursday. Perhaps you've already released them. Who even knows? Because Gary does whatever he wants. Yeah, other than that, join the free Facebook group, get involved, have some fun. Anything else, Gary?
Nothing else to add. Just that it's too easy.
Fantastic.